She told me I was too young. I told her she was just the right kind of trouble. It was one of those ordinary mornings when the world felt a little softer, sunlight spilling across the sidewalks, birds chirping lazily, and the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee drifting from nearby windows. I was hauling my groceries up the stairs when I first noticed her. She stood just ahead, adjusting a potted plant on her balcony. There was a quiet grace in the way she moved, the effortless curve of her posture, and the subtle strength in her hands. Her hair, catching the morning light, fell over her shoulders in soft waves, and for a moment, I felt the absurd pull of being completely mesmerized by someone I had never even spoken to. She turned slightly, her eyes meeting mine, and I felt that curious mixture of embarrassment and fascination, like being caught staring, but in a way that didn't feel shameful. There was a warmth in her smile that made the air seem a little denser, heavier with possibility. She tilted her head just slightly, that confident yet gentle tilt that suggested she noticed far more than she let on. "You're up early," she said, her voice calm but carrying a melody that lingered in my mind long after the words left her lips. There was a teasing edge to it, soft but deliberate. I swallowed, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, figured I'd beat the heat." My words sounded clumsy even to me. She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that seemed to fill the space without needing to be loud. "I suppose you are young enough to handle it," she said, a spark of mischief in her eyes. "Not that I could manage it myself anymore." The words hit me in a way that made my chest tighten, but not unpleasantly. There was a hint of self-awareness, maybe even vulnerability, wrapped in confidence. I found myself wanting to see her again, to linger in the moment just a little longer. We exchanged small pleasantries, nothing remarkable on the surface, yet every word felt charged with an invisible current. A subtle fascination began to grow in me, the kind that makes you notice the tilt of someone's shoulder, the way sunlight hits their cheek, or the tiny pauses before they speak. I realized I was already thinking about her when I shouldn't have even known her name. As I climbed the final steps to my door, I cast one last glance back. She was there, tending to her plant as if nothing had happened, but I knew better. Something had shifted, quietly, almost imperceptibly, yet unmistakably. The ordinary morning had become extraordinary, all because of a simple glance, a fleeting smile, and the gentle, magnetic pull of someone who seemed entirely out of reach, and yet, strangely close. Over the next few days, it felt as though the universe had conspired to put her in my path again. Nothing planned, nothing forced, just chance encounters that made my heart skip in ways I wasn't used to. I ran into her at the mailbox first, reaching for my letters at the exact same time she did. Our hands brushed, light and fleeting, and I felt a tiny spark travel up my arm. "Oh, hello again," she said, with that same warm, teasing smile. There was a familiarity in her tone now, as if this small connection had already begun weaving itself into the fabric of our mornings. I laughed awkwardly, trying to sound natural, but I couldn't hide the flutter in my chest. Then, a few days later, our paths crossed in the grocery store. She was comparing 2 jars of pasta sauce, her brow slightly furrowed in concentration, and something about the sight made me pause. There was a calm elegance in the way she moved, even in the mundane act of shopping, that made it impossible to look away. I caught myself noticing the small details, the way the sunlight through the store windows highlighted her hair, the soft hum of her voice as she spoke to the cashier, and the gentle curve of her hand as it rested on the cart. Each encounter was brief, almost accidental, but I found myself analyzing every detail later. How she tilted her head when she laughed, the warmth that radiated from her presence, even the quiet way she seemed to observe the world. I noticed how my own movements changed. I walked a little straighter, spoke a little slower, all in the subconscious hope she would notice. One afternoon, we met in the stairwell. The space was narrow, and we were forced close together for a few seconds longer than necessary. Her shoulder brushed mine, and I felt that same warmth I had felt at the mailbox, but stronger, more insistent. "You always seem to be in the right place at the right time," she said softly, almost teasing, almost curious. I couldn't decide if she was aware of the tension or simply amused by it. It was in these fleeting, unplanned moments that my curiosity turned into fascination. Every glance, every smile, every accidental brush of her hand felt like an invitation into a world I didn't yet fully understand. There was a silent dialogue in the space between us, a tension that was playful, magnetic, and entirely unspoken. By the end of the week, I realized something both exhilarating and terrifying. I was thinking about her constantly, and the more I saw her, the harder it became to ignore the pull between us. What began as casual observation had transformed into a quiet obsession, tempered by respect, but fueled by a growing, unspoken desire to know her, truly know her, in a way that went far beyond surface-level encounters. It started with something small, almost accidental. A conversation on the staircase while I was carrying a stack of packages, her hands busy adjusting a throw pillow on her balcony. We had begun to notice each other, not just as fleeting presences in the same space, but as individuals with lives that might, just maybe, intersect. "You look tired," she remarked softly, tilting her head in that calm, observant way she always did. There was no judgment in her tone, only genuine concern. I laughed lightly, brushing at my hair as if to dismiss it. "Long week," I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. It wasn't dramatic, but it felt honest, and strangely liberating to say aloud. She nodded knowingly, a quiet empathy in her eyes. "I know the feeling. Life has a way of piling up, doesn't it?" Her voice was low, comforting, like a warm blanket against the cold edges of stress. There was something about the way she leaned slightly forward, not intrusively, but close enough that I could sense the warmth radiating from her body. My chest tightened, a mix of anticipation, curiosity, and the faintest nervousness. The conversation drifted naturally. She shared a story about her work, the quiet frustration of dealing with deadlines and small annoyances. I responded with anecdotes from my own life, though my words felt insufficient to capture the restlessness I carried. Still, in the exchange, there was a bridge forming, a subtle, unspoken understanding. At one point, she reached out to steady a small stack of books that teetered on my arm. Our hands brushed lightly, a touch that lasted just a heartbeat longer than necessary. It was electric in the smallest way, grounding me at the same time. I noticed the warmth of her palm, the gentle pressure, the ease of the gesture. For a moment, all the usual worries, the age difference, the uncertainty of what I was feeling, faded into the background. Her gaze softened as she looked at me. "It's nice," she said quietly, "to talk to someone who actually listens." There was a vulnerability in her tone, a glimpse of something she didn't share often, if ever. And in that instant, I felt an unspoken permission to be more open, to share the quieter corners of my thoughts. As we parted that day, I realized that our connection had grown in ways far beyond fleeting encounters or accidental touches. We had begun to understand each other, the small frustrations, the quiet joys, the hidden fears. And in that understanding, the attraction that had been simmering quietly now carried a depth I hadn't anticipated, a magnetic pull intertwined with respect, curiosity, and the unmistakable beginnings of emotional intimacy. By now, our encounters had taken on a rhythm that felt almost inevitable. Every brief meeting, every accidental touch, every shared smile carried with it a quiet electricity I could no longer ignore. And yet, there was an undercurrent of hesitation, a line neither of us dared cross too soon, but one that pulled at the edges of every conversation. It happened one evening as I helped carry a heavy box up the stairs. She stepped aside to let me pass, and for a moment our arms brushed. The contact was fleeting, nothing more than a casual touch, but I felt a jolt of awareness run through me. Her proximity, the warmth radiating from her body, the subtle fragrance of her perfume, all of it lingered in my senses long after the moment had passed. She caught my gaze and held it, her eyes calm yet flickering with something I couldn't quite name. "You always seem to be in a rush," she said, her voice light, teasing, but there was an unmistakable softness behind it. I chuckled, feeling my own voice catch slightly. "Maybe I just enjoy running into you," I said, immediately regretting the boldness, yet unable to stop myself. There was a pause, a silence that stretched just enough to make my heart race. She didn't laugh or look away. Instead, she offered a small, knowing smile. It wasn't flirtation in the obvious sense, but there was an acknowledgement in her gaze, a recognition of the tension between us, and perhaps, a shared curiosity about where it might lead. The days that followed, I became acutely aware of the unspoken push and pull. Small touches lingered just a fraction too long, a hand resting lightly on a railing near hers, our shoulders brushing as we stepped aside for another neighbor. Every accidental closeness carried the thrill of something forbidden, a desire tempered by respect and social boundaries. Internally, I wrestled with a storm of admiration and hesitation. The age difference, once a casual thought, now loomed larger in my mind. Yet the more I tried to rationalize it away, the stronger the pull became, a magnetic tension that refused to be ignored. I found myself analyzing every glance, replaying every soft laugh and fleeting touch, wondering if she felt it too. Even in these moments of restraint, there was an undeniable intimacy. The attraction wasn't loud or demanding, it was subtle, woven into the rhythm of our encounters, building quietly but insistently. And as I left her apartment one evening, I caught myself lingering at the doorstep, stealing one last glance, and feeling the quiet certainty that this connection, delicate, complicated, and entirely unspoken, was only beginning to unfold. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the world feels muted and the air itself seems to hold its breath. I found myself on her balcony again, the city stretching out below us in a haze of soft lights. We had slipped into comfortable conversation, sharing stories that went beyond casual greetings, childhood memories, late-night regrets, moments of unexpected joy. The familiarity between us had grown, but so had the tension, unspoken yet palpable. I could feel her presence beside me more acutely than ever. The warmth of her shoulder brushed mine as we reached for the same cup of tea. Her fingers lingered just a second longer than necessary on mine, and I felt that quiet jolt of electricity I had been chasing and fearing all at once. The scent of her hair, the gentle cadence of her laugh, the way her eyes caught the light, it all pressed against the edges of my restraint. "Do you ever feel like life is moving too fast?" she asked softly, her gaze on the distant skyline. There was a vulnerability in her voice, an openness she rarely showed to anyone. I hesitated, aware of how much I wanted to lean in, to bridge the invisible space between us, yet equally aware of the boundaries we had silently agreed upon. "I do," I admitted, my own voice quieter than intended. "But, sometimes, it feels like the right moments only come when you stop worrying about the rules." The words were tentative, almost dangerous, yet they were true. She turned to look at me then, and for a long moment, the world seemed to shrink until it was just the two of us. Her eyes were calm, steady, yet flickered with something I could barely name, curiosity, longing, perhaps the same hesitation I felt. I swallowed hard, the pull between us undeniable. "I've wanted to say this for a while," I started, feeling my own pulse in my throat. "I can't stop thinking about you. About being near you. And I know the age difference makes it complicated, but I can't pretend it doesn't matter to me." She was silent for a moment, letting the words settle. Then, with a small, almost imperceptible smile, she reached out and rested her hand lightly over mine. The warmth of her touch, the quiet pressure of her fingers, anchored me in a way that felt both grounding and electrifying. "I've felt it too," she admitted, her voice soft. "And yes, it's complicated. But I can't ignore it either." We didn't need more words. The shared understanding, the tension, the longing, the mutual respect, hung between us, palpable and undeniable. For the first time, the pull that had been simmering quietly became tangible. It was a delicate, tentative step towards something deeper, yet it felt like the most natural thing in the world. After that evening on the balcony, something between us shifted, subtly but undeniably. The tension that had once lingered quietly in the space between us had transformed into something warmer, a slow, steady pull that made every encounter feel layered with meaning. We began spending more time together, often under the guise of casual, everyday moments, a walk through the neighborhood park, sharing a cup of coffee in her sunlit kitchen, or exchanging books and recommendations for films we'd never watched before. What made these moments so captivating wasn't the activities themselves, but the way we were together. There was a comfort in her presence, a quiet intimacy that didn't need to be forced. I found myself noticing everything: the soft brush of her fingers against mine as she handed me a mug, the warmth of her shoulder leaning lightly against mine, the way her laughter seemed to echo softly in my chest long after the sound had faded. One evening, we decided to cook together. The kitchen smelled of garlic and fresh herbs, sunlight streaming in through the window. She guided me gently when I struggled with a chopping technique, her hand resting briefly over mine, her warmth spreading through me in a way I had never anticipated. Our touches were small, seemingly incidental, yet they carried a weight, a promise, a connection, a recognition of something more than friendship. We talked freely during these moments, sharing fears, dreams, and stories from our pasts. Every conversation deepened our understanding of each other, and the emotional intimacy became as palpable as the physical proximity. When she reached for a dish on the counter, our fingers brushed again, and a soft laugh escaped her lips. "You really are paying too much attention," she teased lightly, though her eyes betrayed the same awareness I felt. Even in silence, there was a rhythm to our togetherness. Sitting side by side on the couch, watching the sunlight fade through the blinds, I felt the steady beat of her presence next to me. Her hand found mine almost instinctively, fingers intertwining, and I realized that the simple act of being near her had become profoundly comforting. There was no rush, no grand gestures. Each smile, each touch, each shared glance carried the weight of something significant, something quietly powerful. It was a slow dance of connection, an unfolding intimacy that neither of us wanted to rush. And in those everyday moments, brushing against each other while reaching for a book, laughing over a burnt meal, sharing the quiet hum of evening, I knew we were building something lasting, a romance grounded in respect, desire, and deep emotional trust. The weeks that followed felt like stepping into a world that existed just for the two of us. Our interactions, once tentative and filled with unspoken tension, had evolved into a steady, comforting rhythm. We no longer tiptoed around the feelings simmering between us. Instead, we allowed ourselves to savor the quiet joy of being together. Every shared glance, every brush of fingers, every smile carried the weight of our connection, deep, meaningful, and entirely mutual. One evening, we took a walk through the park just as the sun began to dip behind the horizon. The air was crisp but softened by the golden glow of fading light. We walked side by side, shoulders occasionally brushing, our hands close but not yet entwined. I realized how natural it felt to be near her, how the nervous energy that had once accompanied every interaction had transformed into calm certainty. At a small wooden bench overlooking a pond, we paused. She leaned slightly into me, her warmth radiating softly through my arm. I reached out, fingers brushing against hers until our hands fit together effortlessly, the small gesture carrying a profound intimacy. The tension that had once kept us both cautious had melted into a quiet confidence, a mutual understanding that we were exactly where we were meant to be. We talked openly, honestly, about everything that had brought us to this point, the hesitations, the fears, the unlikely but undeniable connection. She admitted, with a soft laugh and a touch of vulnerability, that she had wondered if our age difference would make this impossible. I confessed my own doubts, the internal conflict of admiration and uncertainty. And yet, in that shared honesty, the boundaries between us dissolved, replaced by a deep trust and acceptance that felt exhilaratingly rare. As the evening air cooled around us, she rested her head lightly on my shoulder. I could feel the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, the subtle warmth of her presence, and it was grounding in a way I had never anticipated. We didn't rush anything, there was no need. The slow unfolding of our connection had made every moment feel earned, every touch meaningful, every glance charged with unspoken understanding. When we finally stood to leave, I felt the full weight of the happiness between us. Fingers intertwined, smiles lingering, laughter soft and unforced, we walked home together. The world around us continued, oblivious to the quiet miracle that had taken root, but in our shared closeness, everything felt complete. In that ordinary yet extraordinary moment, I realized that love, slow, respectful, and patient, could bridge gaps, dissolve hesitation, and turn fleeting encounters into lasting fulfillment. And as we walked side by side, hearts attuned and spirits light, I knew this story, our story, had reached a place of warmth, contentment, and the kind of quiet joy that lingers long after the day is done. If you enjoyed this slow burn love story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced a connection that felt impossible, but irresistible? I'd love to hear your stories.